You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. Sox in the Basement brought to you by Cork and Kerry at the Park, 33rd and Princeton in the shadow of the ballpark. The last home game may have occurred, but that place is open year-round. It's a great place to hang out and watch a Bears game. Hopefully they have a better season than what the White Sox did, and we start seeing a little bit more life out of them. And I don't even want to turn this into a Bears podcast, but I have so much to say about that coaching staff, and maybe they're the wrong staff. But anyway.
Well, we could always focus on the Blackhawks, Connor Bedard. Year 2. That's a
good thing to also watch at Cork and Kerry at the Park. 33rd in Princeton, the original Cork and Kerry at 106th and Western in Beverly. When you go there, great place. Just make sure you're driving the speed limit, because now the city has put like a weird camera near there. Every time I go over there, I have to remember this. They put a camera, Ed, near the original location for Cork and Kerry on Western, and they're claiming it's a park camera. But it is not where the park is. The park is another half block down and on the other side of the street. But the camera is just hitting people going in the other direction on the other side of the street. And I'm like, this is the biggest scam I've ever seen. Approach it at the speed limit and enjoy a drink at Cork and Kerry at 106th and Western. I'm just warning you about the BS camera that the city of Chicago put up there. Just a little right. Throw out warning there for you. See more at corkandkerry.com.
Enjoy responsibly.
Yeah. All right. So here's the deal. The White Sox sweep the Angels, which is hysterical.
Which is also a testament to the Angels. I mean, my goodness.
Yeah, exactly. They sweep the Angels.
What are you guys doing out there?
Which is hysterical. The mood at the ballpark, amazing. The fans like getting excited for the Angels scoring runs because they want to see history, and the team basically fighting against the fans. And I saw Garrett Crochet said something to the press the other day where he did not like the fact that fans were almost rooting for the visitor, like looking for the loss. And I hope somebody explained to him that this is not about the players. This is about the owner. That's why there's sell the team chants. They want Jerry Reinsdorf to own the worst record, not a tie for the worst record. They wanted him to own the worst record in baseball, or the most losses in baseball. And that's what they were rooting for. They're not trying to pick on the players.
I do feel bad for the players, because this goes on their resume as well. And I'm not entirely sure that you can sit there and up and down the roster. And we've gone over the roster. We've gone over who's part of this team in the future, who's got value, what. And we don't need to revisit that. But at the same time, there is not a single one of them that hasn't appeared in a White Sox uniform this year that doesn't get to sit there and say, I was part of the team that had the most losses in Major League history. And for a guy like Garrett Crochet, who should be part of the plans and is here and is a guy that you can get excited about as a Sox fan, in particular, somebody like him, I understand where he would bristle at it. And the one thing, I think that I wish and I hope the players understand that, like, we're rooting for you guys. Individually right now, we're rooting for you guys. But it would really, really be nice as a fan to have Jerry Reinsdorf win this. 40 plus years, 7 playoff appearances.
Hang it on him. Put it around his neck and hang it on him. And, maybe it's fitting that Jason Benetti will likely call the big loss, right? After we read about everything that happened to him. I mean, the articles that have come out over the last week or so have been so amazing. And we've talked about the Athletic one, which kind of exposed Jerry didn't like Jason Benetti, amongst other things. He doesn't like analytics. He empowered the wrong people, everything that we've always talked about. And we went into it in depth. And to go into every article at this point would just be overkill, because I know you're all reading the same thing that Ed and I are reading. But some of the stuff that's come out over the last week or so, the idea that there were players like Lance Lynn and others that really didn't like Liam Hendriks, and they had to beg guys to come to the press conference about his cancer, that was a riff. I mean, Liam Hendriks is a former guest of this show. I've never talked to Lance Lynn, so I don't know him at all. I don't know his personality. I just know he's a guy who likes to swear a lot on the mound. I mean, he just seems like a guy who's got an attitude. And I've met Liam Hendriks. Liam Hendriks is one of the nicest people I've met as an interviewee in my entire career, and that includes when I was doing radio. Because remember when he did the interview, Ed, I just want people to hear this story about him, what a genuine person that he is. His wife had a pipe burst in her house, and he had made a promise to come on the show, and he was driving to help her with a flood, and he spent a half hour in the car with us doing a really good interview and giving us his time when he could have very easily said, no, we're just a podcast doing a show in a basement on the south side of Chicago. Give me a break. And he was just so gracious about the entire thing. And even when he was done, sat with us off air and just kind of shot the bull with us for a little bit.
Right.
I mean, so when I hear that some players didn't want to support him, I don't buy any narrative that would suggest that he did something wrong, because he seemed like a very genuine, good person. And it really tells you how bad that locker room was, that there were people who they didn't want to support him. They couldn't get veterans to come stand there during the press conference and show support. That's gross. Clearly, there had to be a bloodletting. Clearly, you understand some of Get's comments now, as a guy who was in the building at least when that was happening. And the idea that guys needed to be moved out of there and he wasn't interested in re-signing any of them or bringing any of them. There's a reason for all of that. And now you're getting to see it. And the question I have, Ed, that I want to ask you is, do I blame the beat reporters here because we had to wait for the national guys? Or should I understand that the way this organization works is, if you're a beat reporter and you start going into this stuff that you're clearly aware of, right? Like, you're clearly aware these things are going on. If a national guy can come in who doesn't have as much access as you do, and they can get all these stories, you know what's going on. But they would probably never get access again. This team would shut them out. And so do you blame them for that? Or do you just sit there and say, thank goodness this team lost so many games that it made the national guys show up, because they don't care what Jerry Reinsdorf and the front office think about what they write?
Well, this historically bad season allows the national guys to have a story of interest, right? I mean, you and I were even contacted by the Canadian Broadcasting Company to talk about how bad this season was. And it's one of those things where the national guys do have power and do have pull with a lot of different players, and just have that sort of, we don't really need to be told we have access or we don't have access because we're ESPN, because we are The Athletic. Ken Rosenthal, when that first article came out, we noted that Ken Rosenthal can say whatever he wants about Jerry Reinsdorf, and Jerry Reinsdorf can't do anything to him because he's Ken Rosenthal. So as you're seeing the national media pay attention and really shine a spotlight on this and hear about things that we're not hearing from the beat reporters, I do think that there is some of that where you sit there and go, okay, I'm a beat reporter. My entire living is made on having access to this team and being able to create some content out of this. And I know what's going on here, but I can't risk being blacklisted by Jerry. And that's a very, very real thing. So I think if you're on the local level, there probably is some gamesmanship that has to be played. There's some politicking that has to be done. You've got to stay on the right side of it or risk being pushed out. And if you're pushed out, where do you go? That's a very real thing. But again, Jerry can't sit there and say, well, the White Sox will never do anything with ESPN ever again, because ESPN's going to sit there and go, we didn't want you in the first place. We're just here because you guys suck so bad, everybody in the country is actually interested in you. Remember, we're talking about national media that sometimes forgets who won the 2005 World Series.
And as we dive into this discussion on the different White Sox coverage that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, you may need different windows, doors, patio doors, storm doors. Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest is there for you. No high-pressure sales. They don't come to you, track mud into the house. Instead, you go and see them at their showroom. That way, you're not looking at a picture in a book or a dingy example window. You're seeing everything full-sized, all the different options. There's an owner in the showroom. There's an owner on site during install when they use their own Window and Door Superstore installers. They never farm out the work. For 40 years, they've been doing this, even more than that. In Oak Forest since 1985, all major brands custom made, no stock items for a perfect fit. They're a half block east at 159th and Ridgeland at 6280 159th Street. window and door superstore of Oak Forest. See more at windowdooroakforest.com. The Athletic got rid of their local beat reporter. Remember? James Fegan was with The Athletic, and they got rid of about 4 or 5 beats nationwide, and one of them was the White Sox because they didn't think that there were fans that cared about the team, which is funny because 18,000 people were there on Tuesday in the rain to see the worst team in baseball. So don't tell me that White Sox fans don't care. And so, that's the amazing thing. I think that probably bugs the beat reporters a little bit, even though they're happy that it's out and they didn't have to sacrifice access to get in there. That had to kind of irk them a little bit. Here's The Athletic exposing this thing. You want it exposed, right? You want these things out there. And they're getting all the credit for doing it. And they left the beat years ago. I go back and I think about what beat reporters have said on the show. I go back to Merkin's comments earlier in the season. And he goes, the clubhouse is much better now. Remember that?
Yeah.
And we're trying to figure out, what's so good about the clubhouse? I mean, they're the worst team in baseball. How could the clubhouse be better? We laughed about it, right? And that's what he's referring to. He's referring to the Hendricks thing and the Lance Lynn thing and these other guys and all the stress that was going on there and the problems that were going on in the clubhouse. That's what he's referring to. He knew, and I don't blame him for not saying anything because he works for MLB.com. And that's a rough thing to throw yourself out there and do that. Every beat reporter would have to get together and agree, we're all going to write this. And you'd have to trust each other. Because otherwise this team would turn around and start pulling, well, you're not coming here anymore. Right? Or you're not getting that interview anymore. My impression of the White Sox is they're spiteful. And I've gotten that firsthand because when we talk honestly, we used to get guests that the White Sox would arrange for the show. We don't get them anymore.
Yeah.
So I believe that that's a possibility that a beat reporter is sitting there going, man, this is going to make my job a lot harder. Thank goodness that the national guys were able to come in. And don't think that the beat guys didn't talk to the national guys like, hey, go ask this guy about this. Really? Oh, yeah, here, go over there. You're going to get a good story. Don't think that they don't do that.
No, they all talk, and I'm sure of that. Okay, I don't have to be a member of that community of the beat reporters. I don't have to be a member of MLB journalism to really know that for a fact. I mean, we know that there are certain things that you just probably don't write about. Okay, when you're covering a baseball team. And interpersonal conflict can become interesting if it's something that translates into what's going on in the field. So if the clubhouse chemistry this year had been just awful and guys are fighting and there's an issue, I'm sure we would have actually heard about that. Okay. Good clubhouse chemistry is kind of a non-story and it sounds like a company line type of a thing, which is why we laughed at Merck when that came out. And when he said that, because we're sitting there going, how could you be this dysfunctional on the field and be that functional in the clubhouse? But the reality is that you can actually have guys that are pulling together. And getting back to our earlier point, Garrett Crochet being a little, ticked off at fans for wanting the loss. It's something where I'm sure, those guys that are in that clubhouse are all pulling together and they are all standing there. It's us against everybody because they all want us to see it. Everybody wants to see them fail at this point.
Well, it's obvious that they pulled together against Pedro earlier in the year now too. Garrett Crochet's comments when he gave that other quote, he also talked about the fast thing that was being pushed by Grifol.
Yeah. And
he talked about we're not that team and I'd rather be villains. I'd rather be when do we get back to being like the black sheep essentially of this? Like everybody loves the Cubs. We're the guys wearing black. I want to be a villain. And he was open in that interview to the idea of an extension. Remember, he was not when Pedro was the manager.
Right.
And so I think you go back to Gavin Sheets and his comments when they stood up against Pedro and Corey Lee. And everybody's like, how's this rookie? Where does he get off talking? Well, but he was part of that group. And you saw players together. I don't think they really liked the manager. Like Grady Sizemore, his influence may only just be that he puts together a consistent lineup and they like him and respect him. That's essentially what the difference is with Grady and Pedro, because they didn't like Pedro's style and they didn't like what Pedro was preaching and they didn't like when he threw him under the bus and there was a disconnect with the players, but they bonded over Pedro almost. That's what it kind of feels like. This group is bonded a little bit over Pedro. It is not turned into something that makes me believe you can bring the same guys back and be good next year because they bonded now. But I get the clubhouse thing a little bit more after the articles and some of the quotes that have come out as early as this week.
Well, and getting back to the local reporters too, when you're talking about these conflicts, okay, if you got to paint one guy as a bad guy and you got to paint somebody else as a good guy, because that's how this breaks out, right? There's very little to be gained by saying it's shades of gray. There's fault on both sides. Someone's going to come out looking bad in this, and losing access to the players to a certain degree, more so than losing access to the clubhouse itself, losing access to, whatever Jerry restricts you to, losing that bond with the players, feeling like they've been betrayed, that can be an issue as well for a beat reporter. So, you don't necessarily want to sit there and say, we're going to muckrake by throwing guys under the bus. I'm not really worried too much about that, because I think when you get into the ex-players, okay, somebody, Lance Lynn and Liam Hendricks, there being an issue there, when we've heard about what the clubhouse was like with the whole Adam LaRoche thing, right, and his son, when we've heard things about bad clubhouse guys in the past, it always comes out after they're gone, right? So that's nothing new. I really honestly think what Garrett Crochet is getting at, though, which is an interesting thing and something that I believe that you would have to look at with what is Chris Getz trying to build, what's the next manager trying to do, what does the team want to be, and that is there is no real identity for this team. The identity for this team was it's better at the ballpark, drink a milkshake, right? And that's not a team identity. That's marketing. Come to the ballpark,
and that milkshake sucks. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah,
it's terrible.
And enough about them. Forget it. Doesn't matter.
It doesn't even. I don't even know if it's milk.
You're not going to have any more because they're done at home.
Yeah, they'll be doing something else next year.
Yeah, next year it'll be something.
Bring back the churro shake. It was on the 300 level.
Yeah,
that was good, man.
That was really good.
Bring back the churro shake. That's all I'm saying.
But also, good guys wear black. The kids can play, right? We've had marketing in the past where the White Sox had something of an identity. There was an identity to the 2005 team. There was an identity in 1983 with Win and Ugly. There's nothing here that we can look at with this team and sit there and say, these guys are the plucky underdogs, or these guys are the rebels or the renegades. These guys are a scrappy bunch of never will be's that are going to come together. It's not like Major League. I mean, it kind of is, but it really isn't, because that fictitious Cleveland Indians team had an identity.
The only thing that's Major League-y is the evil owner.
With the evil owner and the massive amounts of losing that went on in the early part of that movie. And then in the sequel.
Isn't it interesting, though, that Crochet is considering the idea of an extension now? And wouldn't it be neat to see Getz say, yeah, let's get an extension done? Because Kenny Williams would have had so much bad blood, he would have just gotten rid of him in the offseason.
Well, the minute Garrett Crochet speaks out against Kenny Williams or Rick Hahn, right, or suggests that there's any trouble in the clubhouse, then he's blackballed by his own GM.
Yeah.
Right? That felt like what would happen with the previous regime. But I do honestly think Chris Getz is a former player and a guy who spent a lot more time in a major league clubhouse than Kenny Williams did as a player. He does have that sort of sense that, like, what he needs to build from a cultural standpoint is a little bit of, there's got to be some identity. And if Garrett Crochet is a guy that other players will listen to, and if Gavin Sheets is a guy that other players will listen to, and they want to establish going into next year, we're the bad guys. That's okay by me, because that means that they're at least going to have their own rallying cry. And if Grady Sizemore or whoever they bring in as a manager is down with that and supportive of that, maybe that's what some of the young guys need to build on their performances. If Garrett Crochet gets an extension, if he does not get traded in the offseason, if Garrett Crochet wants to establish an identity of this team, even if it's a fictitious identity, even if it's somewhat comical and laughable, it's something, right? It's something that you and I as fans and everybody else can sit there and go, yeah, you know what? We're going to adopt the screw you attitude too. And honestly, it fits with the White Sox, because what have we been doing against Cubs fans our entire lives?
Yeah. Joining me on the phone line right now, the Sox nerd, Dave Marin, who has been putting tidbits up on the scoreboard at the rate for 38 years. Is that right? 38 years of tidbits and trivia?
Pretty much 38 years, yes. Putting up nuggets on the scoreboard during White Sox games, yes.
Amazing.
2,168 games in the new park. And I don't know the exact number from the old park. Maybe I'll find that out this winter.
So, hardest season ever? It has to be hardest season ever, even though you got a sweep at the end.
Yes, I mean, yes, it was it was the hardest season ever, but we still have fun. The information is always there, and it's always fun just to dig up information. I would say that it was probably the most challenging season ever in terms of information, but we still had a blast.
The Nerd is brought to you by the Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history, great eats and drinks, and green spaces filled with adventure? Visit the Village of Lamont. Shop, dine, drink, explore. Check out on October the 5th, that's a Saturday, a pirate pub crawl through Lamont. Dress as a pirate and go drinking. I don't know how you wouldn't want to go do that. See more at lamontdowntown.com. What do you got for me this week?
Chris, I was pleased to hear that Steve Stone recently signed an extension to broadcast White Sox games. Steve has been a constant in Chicago since the early 1980s and on the South Side since the mid-2000s. I find Steve extremely fair, firm, funny, friendly, and of course, extremely knowledgeable. I really appreciate the fact that Steve will indulge in an occasional question from me, no matter how obscure, on his career, and I'll have more on this in a second. It's hard to believe Stone is not in the broadcaster's wing of the Baseball Hall of Fame as the winner of the Ford C. Frick Award, which is presented annually to the broadcaster for major contributions to baseball. Steve has been broadcasting since he retired in 1982. Anyone who can work with the likes of Bob Uecker, Al Michaels, Howard Cosell, Harry Carey, Bill Murray, and Hawk Harrelson certainly deserves to be enshrined in Cooperstown. Steve has been a finalist for this award before, so it could be just a matter of time until he joins the likes of Sox-connected Carey, Brickhouse, Elson, Harrelson, and Hamilton in this wing of the hall. Steve had his moments in two stints as a pitcher for the Sox, for whom he was 33 and 35 with a 4.38 ERA in 97 games. One of his Sox games I asked him about was his start in the 1973 finale. He fanned 12 while pitching into the 10th against an Oakland team which was in the heart of its championship run. What made that 1-0 win so remarkable was that Stone didn't even think he was going to pitch in the series. The other game I've chatted with him about was his first game in his native Cleveland on June 10, 1973. I'm fairly certain this was the last time the Sox used an emergency catcher, and that man was Hank Allen, the brother of the great Dick Allen. Some more on Steve. He earned his only pro save for the Sox on May 15, 1973, when he struck out Joe Rudy and Gene Tennis with the bases loaded to preserve a 6-5 win in 12 innings in Oakland. He led the 1977 Southside Hitmen White Sox with 15 wins and the 78 club with 12 wins. He was the only righty to lead the Sox in wins between 1970 and 1981. And one more, Stone made his first start of his 1980 Cy Young campaign with Baltimore at Comiskey Park, and while he pitched well, he lost it. On April 12th, Stone departed after giving up 3 earned runs in 5 innings in the Sox 8-2 win. Before I get to my zinger, a reminder, you can access my blog at soxinthebasement.com, and there is plenty of Sox nerd material on Twitter. My zinger, Corey Lee has given me some decent material this season, including this one. At age 26, he is the second youngest catcher in Sox history to hit at least 12 homers in a season. The youngest was 23-year-old Ed Herman, who hit 19 homers in 1970. That's it, Chris. Probably more than you wanted to know about the Stone Pony, Ford Frick, Corey Lee, and Howard Cosell.
Let's talk about one of the players on this team that at the end of the season has me thinking, whoa, he's actually doing really well. I want to talk about Lenyn Sosa.
Oh, yeah.
Because the last month or so has been really good at the plate. And I know I'm starved to find like a positive. Like, I'm excited about Benintendi since Grady Sizemore. Benintendi since Grady Sizemore is a $15 million a year player.
He's playing up to his contract.
Playing to his contract since Grady got in there. Absolutely. Lenyn Sosa, over the last 30 games, 113 at-bats, consistency too. He's playing every day. That's something that has changed. 327 with a 342 on-base percentage and a 451 slugging percentage. That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really good. He's hitting 396 over his last 15 games with an over 1,000 OPS. He's on a heater for sure. But I think he's a real hitter, and I want to explain why. We've talked about him before, and I have admittedly given up on him. Earlier in the season, when I'm giving up on everybody, I was giving up on him. And maybe I gave up too soon. Because if you go back and look at him at the age of 21 years old, he's hitting 290 with a 764 OPS in A-ball in Winston-Salem. And they move him up to Double-A. He gets 121 plate appearances over 35 games. And he only hits 214, 522 OPS. But the next year, at the same level in Double-A, given consistent at-bats, 289 plate appearances, he hits 331 with a 933 OPS in Birmingham. So he goes up to Charlotte. And he struggles a little bit out of the gate, but even finishes that second half of the season and 247 plate appearances with consistent playing time, hitting 297 with an 821 OPS. Then in 22, he gets to come up to the White Sox for the first time. And he gets inconsistent playing time, spread out over 11 games and 36 plate appearances, where he only hits 114. He goes and plays for Venezuela. He plays really well. He hits really well. He goes to Charlotte in 23, hits 271 with an 820 OPS, average down a little bit, but you know what? He's still producing, getting a lot of extra base hits. He had 17 home runs. But again, he comes up last year in 23, and he gets inconsistent playing time. You can't tell me that you remember him being in the lineup every single day.
No, sometimes back-to-back, but never every day.
With inconsistent playing time, trying to adjust to the hardest level in baseball, he hits 201 with a 571 OPS. And then this year, when he's in Charlotte, hitting 275, 860 OPS, he's clearly a very good AAA hitter. And he struggled here this year, and Pedro was not consistent on where he was in the lineup, and he was not consistent on where he played, and he was not consistent on when he played. And one of the things that we would hear when a guy like James Fox or Elijah Evans would come on from Future Sox or Just Baseball, and they would talk about when he gets to a new level, he needs to work it out, and he needs consistent at-bats. And now what did Grady do? You're playing here, you're playing every day, you're playing in this section of the lineup, here's some consistency. And look what he's doing with it. Now, he's a terrible fielder, Ed. He's absolutely
that's
brutal.
That's the problem,
in the field.
yeah.
He's, man, somebody's got to teach him to do better out there. But he can hit. And we haven't had a lot of hitters, right? So you're going to put up with him because he can hit. Like it's the old thing with Tim Anderson when I would say he's a really great shortstop when he's breaking batting records. He's not when he's hitting 250 because he can't play defense. That's kind of what Sosa is. On a team with all kinds of holes, this is a good development, I think. And I don't think it's fool's gold. I think he can actually hit. I think what we just saw is him adjust to the major league level.
No, I agree with you 100% because we've talked about Lenyn Sosa in the past as a guy that did exactly what you just spelled out, right? Gets to a level, struggles, gets some regular playing time there and a chance to adapt, and then adapts and figures it out. And you can sit here and say, well, you're feasting on clearly a terrible Angels team. But at the same time, there's also a lot to be said about the fact that this is not his first cup of coffee in the majors. He has struggled up here before. He's had opportunities to at least see the pitching, but he wasn't given an opportunity to play. And now that you're seeing him get an opportunity to play and be able to relax and sit there and go, I know I'm in the lineup. He can just go out there and have fun, put the bat on the ball and see what happens. There's room for him somewhere if he's going to keep that up. Even if on this team, he could even be a DH if the defense is just that brutal. You can figure out a way to get a guy like that into a lineup that doesn't have anybody like that in the lineup. And so, there's a lot of talk at the end of a year when rosters have expanded. They don't expand that much. But when pitchers are tired, teams have started to give up that aren't in contention anymore. They're trying guys out that sometimes the stats can look inflated. But I think with Sosa, I think with Benintendi, Even Andrew Vaughn, who over the last 15 days is hitting 295 with an 840 OPS.
There's no consistency. He's up and down. I've been thinking about him while you're talking about Sosa and Benintendi. And I'm like, no, this guy here, he's up, he's down. He's been getting consistency forever. I'm not giving him $5 million in arbitration.
Yeah, he's what he is, right? You can see by contrast, like here's a guy who's getting hot to end the year, but here's a guy that's been streaky his whole career at this point, right? So Benintendi and Sosa haven't shown that they are hot, cold guys at this point. So I think you can believe that Sosa is a guy that going into next year, if he feels like he's got a spot on this team and has this kind of success, it's not going to be something where we sit there and go, he fooled everybody in September, right? He fooled everybody at the end of the year. I think it's something where you're going to see him. I don't think he'll hit 381 with an OPS over 1,000. But I do think that you have a guy that will very comfortably hit 275 for you and will get some extra base hits and will make some things happen for you in a lineup. And I think Benintendi's that guy as well, because that's what he was at the back end of his baseball card. And the question going into next year is, with a couple of pieces like that, and then Luis Robert Jr. hopefully living up to some level of his billing.
You have to add a couple professional hitters to make Luis Robert Jr. motivated, I believe. If you get Benintendi hitting and Sosa is real what he's doing, and Robert Jr. gets one or two professional guys with the money that you should have, we keep saying it, he'll have $50 million to play with, especially if he makes the right moves with arbitration. He'll have plenty of money to work with. You could put Tim Elko over at first base, unless you want to add one of the many first base professional hitters that are going to be out there. You definitely don't bring back Vaughn or Sheets. You can't pay these guys arbitration money, Ed. I mean, Sheets is hitting 200 over the last 30 days, while Vaughn is hitting 294 or whatever he is, 281. And we talk about this every 3 weeks. Well, this one's up, so the other guy sucks. They're never good at the same time.
No, they've never been good at the same time. It's amazing.
It's amazing how they're always, like, one of them's always good. You're like, oh, maybe Sheets is the guy. And then, oh, maybe Vaughn is the guy. And you know what? Neither one of them are the guy. Neither one of them are the guy. That's the thing.
No.
So, yeah, I think you add a couple of hitters. I think you see Benintendi hitting well. I think Sosa's going to be out there. He's going to be a defensive liability. Maybe you can work on that. I don't know if defense can be taught
maybe
better.
Sosa's a first baseman then. Yeah, maybe the answer is that you have left field, center field, and first base covered, and now go out there and let's see what you can put around the rest of the horn.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.